All right, here we are. Here goes. And listeners of a particular generation will be especially thrilled that we've got this person on. I just want to say from the outset, I believe the brotherhood that this man is part of alphas the wars.
Oh, really?
In relative terms. I do,
okay,
yeah.
Okay.
And here are some numbers to back that up.
Please.
87 test matches, 7,110 runs there, highest score of 247 not out, an average of 53.86, 31 50s, 24 tonnes. As before you even get into the super tests, very average 69. First class cricket, 321 matches, 24,535 runs. Again, a high score of 247 not out, an average of 52.2, so average higher in test cricket, if you will, just stepping up. 111 50s, 74 hundreds, 376 catches, 291 first-class wickets, too, and a best of 7 for 40 there. Cheers. He was the outstanding batsman of his generation, one of the most influential voices in Australian cricket this century. I'm, of course, talking about Greg Chappell. Greg, welcome to The Grade Cricketer.
Thanks, Sam. Nice to be here.
Have you ever heard all of your stats read out in one go like that? Like, how does it make you feel to hear those numbers?
Yeah, I probably have at some point. It's funny, it feels like someone else did it. It's such a long time ago, for one thing, but it feels a bit unreal in a lot of ways. I never played the game for that reason. You played the game because you loved it. You played the game because you loved the challenges that it presented from an individual point of view, but also from a group point of view. Trying to achieve a goal together, the camaraderie that you built up over years, particularly with guys that were around for a long time. You talked about World Series cricket. That was a special sort of segment of that life. But it does seem like another life.
Greg, you've been involved in cricket at all levels. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody around who has just traversed every part of cricket in this country, even around the world. You're an international player, international captain, international selector, international coach. You stewarded the National Centre of Excellence before serving as National Talent Manager in 2010. You've seen it all. So it begs the question, how important is second grade, and what's your relationship to grade cricket?
Look, grade cricket is very important. That's where we all start, obviously, and I have very fond memories of the Glenelg Cricket Club where we grew up. We grew up at North Glenelg, which was probably, 3 or 4 Ks from the Glenelg Oval, and we were on the other side of, the tracks, if you like. I mean, Glenelg Oval was on the Brighton side of Glenelg, and we were over at North Glenelg, which was sort of an add-on suburb around the time that I was born, basically. So we were initial residents of that area, and it was a particularly close-knit group because all of the families arrived pretty much at the same time. So a lot of the activity that we were involved in summer and winter revolved in that part of the suburb, and then as we progressed up the levels, not only of cricket but baseball, the Glenelg Baseball Club was resident at Glenelg Oval for many years. So our social life, our sporting life, our mates, all sort of, the Glenelg Cricket Club, the Glenelg Oval, was a social centre of the day because most families didn't have 2 cars, so you walked or rode a bike or whatever you did to get there. Or our father played for the Glenelg District Cricket Club, so when he was still playing, the whole family went. So every player's whole family went. So all the kids of those players were at the ground. So it was a very social and a very big part of our lives, and so therefore it has a lot of very happy memories from those days. And then as we graduated, into schoolboy cricket, we represented the Glenelg District Cricket Club in the under-16 competition as it was in those days. It then later became an under-17 competition. But the memories, the friendships, every bit of it was generated through that environment, and that cricket club was a very important part of it. So I didn't play second grade. I was lucky enough. Well, actually, that's a lie. I did play second grade because Prince Alfred College, the school at which we all attended, Prince Alfred College, St Peter's College and Adelaide Boys High School all played, their first 11s played in the men's B grade competition. So while we were at school, we played second grade. So that was very important because that was the first level at which I played against adults from the age of 14.
So Glenelg, obviously, for our overseas list, is one of the most famous South Australian institutions, not just cricket clubs, as Greg says there. But so do you remember your first game of grade? Obviously, debuting in first grade is just amazing. Just straight away, no idea of second grade.
I played a bit of second grade after school.
Yeah. Do you remember your first game of first grade, and how old were you when you debuted in first grade?
Well, I'll go back a step if you don't mind. I can remember vividly my first game of second grade. I was 14 years of age. I'd just been elevated to the first 11 at Prince Alfred College. And I'd been playing in the under 15 in shorts, as you do. For some reason or other, our father wouldn't let me wear long trousers for my first game of first 11 cricket, which was second grade. So I've gone out to bat in my first second grade game against West Torrens in shorts. Well, you may well laugh. Every other bastard did. I wasn't laughing. I was the only one in the game wearing shorts. So I was a short ass as well. At that stage I would have been, 5'4" if I was lucky. So I stand out in the crowd. Obviously, I walk out to bat. I can remember Kingsley Wellington was the captain of the West Torrens team.
Great name.
Kingsley was captain of the South Australian baseball team at that stage and probably even the coach. He had played baseball and cricket against my father and my elder brother. So he knew me, and so I was a target. I had a target on the back from the minute I walked out because he'd clashed with both my father and my brother on the sporting field, and he'd obviously lost those battles, so he was going to win this one.
Yeah.
And he made me a target from the minute I walked out of bat, and I was very nervous. Those shorts could easily have been filled up at some point because in the era there were a lot of chuckers around at the time, and so Donald Bradman was trying to rid the game of chuckers. That was about the time of the Ian Meckiff incident and so on in Test cricket, but there was a lot going on in grade cricket in Adelaide because every club had one or two blokes who threw the ball.
That's awesome.
And so Sir Donald was trying to clean that out. They were banned from playing first grade. Guess what? They were allowed to play second grade. So I've got a fella called Parry and another fella called Smith running in from each end. They may as well have not run up. They both played baseball for the West Torrens Baseball Club, and I think they'd mixed up the season. And it was scary because even though Ian had thrown balls at me in the backyard, he hadn't thrown them as hard as this. So I was ready to fill the shorts when Kingsley Wellington started to pick on me. And he did me the biggest favour of all time because I forgot about the blokes who were running in and throwing them at my head and thought, well, if I've annoyed you that much walking out here in my shorts, if I can stick around for a while, maybe that'll give you the willies even more. So that was a memorable occasion. I don't remember. I think I got around about 20. And they were the hardest earned runs outside of the backyard.
No wonder you wanted to get rid of second grade later.
Now, I hope we come to that topic before we finish. But anyway, so then I left school. Sort of early December, I left school. The next weekend, I played my first game in the A grade side, first grade for Glenelg, against Port Adelaide. And the opening bowling attack for Port Adelaide was Eric Freeman and Neil Hawke, who a few months earlier had opened the bowling for Australia. So again, if I'd been wearing shorts, they would have been in danger again. But luckily I was wearing long trousers on this occasion. And that was, again, a huge moment in my life, representing the cricket club at first grade for the first time, but batting against two test bowlers. And that was the thing of the era, because we only had one format of Test cricket, not only Shield cricketers, but Test cricketers played quite a bit of first grade. You know, they might play 4 or 5, 6 games of first grade during a season. The Sheffield Shield players might play, you know, half the first grade calendar. So the next generation of young cricketers, of whom I was one at the time, got challenged by first-class cricketers and Test cricketers at that level, which was a very important part of growing up in the game at the time.
Greg, there's so much to talk about over your entire career. If I could skip forward a lot there to just the great success of your Test career. You mentioned Sir Donald there before. I mean, you were born in the same month Bradman played his last Test. You were the first to break his Test runs record. Younger people might recall the consternation when Mark Taylor nearly overtook Bradman's highest score in 98, and this was nearly 20 years earlier when you did that. I mean, can you tell us what was the mood around the country when you surpassed Bradman? Did he congratulate you, and was Ian pretty happy?
Sir Donald did congratulate me. Telegram in the day. Very generous comments that he made about my cricket, but I know that I didn't consider it breaking any of his records. It was just a longevity thing. I played enough matches to make that many runs, but the record doesn't bear comparison. So I don't think anyone took it that seriously, in the sense that it was a milestone and only a milestone.
Fair enough.
And from my point of view, I mean, it wasn't that big a deal. It was nice having got that far. I'd made the announcement at the start of what was my last Test match. That was my last Test match, and at that stage, I think I was 60-odd runs short of Sir Donald's target of 6,996. And from my point of view, one of the reasons that I made the announcement at the start of the Test match, I didn't want to get within 5 runs of Sir Donald's mark and think that I should play another Test match next year. That it was irrelevant, other than from the point of view that it was a milestone. To be the first Australian batsman to make 7,000 Test runs was an interesting footnote, but that's all it was.
Just another one from your playing career as well, Greg. You said your first tour of the Caribbean in 1973 was the best atmosphere you played in. Again, a lot of listeners here, that would have been before their time. You talked about...
What's your point?
The love of... You talked about the love of the game there, the lightness of attitude, the joy of the game. Can you paint a picture for the listeners of getting a beer or getting on the circuit in the Caribbean in 1973?
Yeah, it was a fabulous time. I'd grown up listening to cricket. There wasn't a lot of television around until I was a teenager, so cricket to me had come over the airwaves, and I'd listened to cricket as a youngster in bed from England and from the Caribbean, and two-wave radio. So that'll be a real stretch for a lot of your listeners if they're that young. So the sound, they were literally sound waves, and the voices would sort of disappear momentarily on the sound waves. So the games had a very distinct sound to them, and each ground had a distinct sound. And, the cricket from the Caribbean sounded different from the cricket in England, where everybody was very polite in England and, polite applause. The crowds in the West Indies were much noisier, a lot of music and, a lot of carnival sort of atmosphere. So I was really looking forward to going to the Caribbean. I'd looked forward to going to England the year before, because that's what I'd grown up dreaming about. But, and having, being a teenager when Sir Frank Worrell brought the West Indies to Australia in 60-61, and that was such a great series, and the style of West Indian cricket, Gary Sobers, Rowan Canai, Roland Butcher, these batsmen just captured my imagination when I saw them as a teenager. So I was excited about going to the Caribbean. We went to Jamaica first, Kingston, Jamaica. And Kingston was in the throes of gun laws and, arrests people put in jail without any trial. There was a lot of unrest, so we were told to be careful, don't go out at night. If you go out at all, go out in groups. So that put a bit of an edge to our first stop. And what happened, we would go to an island like Jamaica first up. You would play a game against Jamaica, and then the next week you'd play the test match and move on. So it was the same sort of pattern through the islands. You'd play against the first-class team, then you'd play the test match. So we went to Sabina Park and we played the game against Jamaica. It was a nice atmosphere, but a good crowd, but nothing spectacular. A nice ground, probably getting towards the end of it. It had a big mud walls all the way around the ground, barbed wire on posts at the top of these walls that we didn't quite understand. We played against Jamaica, who had a fast bowler called Uton Dow, D-O-W-E. And Uton was reputed to be the fastest bowler in the world. And he didn't play in the game for Jamaica. Everywhere we went in Jamaica in that sort of 10 days, or in fact we were there a bit longer because we played another game against the President's 11. So we were there for 3 weeks, and every function we went to for 3 weeks, we heard about Uton Dow. And we were looking forward to seeing him, but not in a rush to see him. So when he got left out of the Jamaican team for the game the week before the test match, I don't know, we must have had 16 players on tour. 15 of us were delirious. Chief Chappell was the angriest man I've ever seen. He genuinely loved fast bowling, and he was disappointed that he wasn't going to see this new young quick. So the story was supposedly that he was injured, but what we were hearing was they didn't want us to see him before the test match. So the first morning of the test match at Jamaica, there's a lot of excitement. We get on the bus from the hotel and we're all looking forward to it. We arrive at the ground at 9 o'clock in the morning. I think the test match starting at 11 o'clock. We're arriving just before 9 o'clock. The ground is full to overflowing. There are people lined up down the street. I don't know how many the ground could contain, but it was overfull when we arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning. And it had, because they played soccer there in the off season, there were 4 light pylons that were used for the soccer matches. And you guys probably don't know what a Meccano set is, but these light towers were metal sort of towers that looked like a 4 Meccano set. And on those light towers, there would have been a couple of hundred people, sort of all the way up these light towers that are maybe 100 feet in the air. So this is long before the game is due to start. So we arrive and we start warming up, and each time players walked out onto the ground, the crowd would erupt into excitement. Music was playing. Everyone was drinking rum. The blokes up on the light towers had their flagon of rum, and they were ready for the day, and they weren't coming down to go to the bathroom. So the flagon became very useful later in the day while they were up the light tower. Anyway, Ian has won the toss, and the toss brought more excitement than I'd ever seen at the cricket ground before as the 2 captains walked out to toss. Rowan Canai and Ian Chappell, the captains. Ian's won the toss and has elected to bat. So Stacky's, I've never seen a more excited man. He's opening the batting, and Uton Dow is going to open the bowling, and he can't wait to get there. The rest of us weren't quite so confident. Anyway, out they go to bat, and the noise by this stage, which has been growing from 9 o'clock till 11 o'clock, has just been getting louder by the minute, to the point where Uton Dow measured out his run, and they're all clapping and making a huge racket. And as Uton Dow turns to run in for the first time, absolute silence. I've never experienced it anywhere before or since. As soon as he started his run up, the crowd went silent. Uton Dow bowled a bouncer, which Stacky hooked for 4, and the crowd erupted and continued at that level for the rest of the day. It was unbelievable. And as I say, I've never experienced anything like it before. Even on the other islands, it wasn't quite like that. But at the end of, I think, 6 overs, Newton Dow had none for 48. So Stacky had absolutely smashed him because Newton was quick. He did like bowling short, and that's exactly where Stacky enjoyed it. So Rowan Cano has taken Newton Dow off and didn't bring him back until the second new ball late in the first day when, as he handed the ball to Newton Dow, some wag up on one of these light towers has yelled out, "Cano, haven't you heard the 11th commandment? Thou shalt not bowl." And that was the sort of level of humour that went on. The crowds were terrific. The cricket was terrific. It was played in great spirit. Yeah. Some, very different conditions around the island. All the pitches were, a little bit different. Most of them hard, except in Trinidad where it spun a lot. That was one of the more enjoyable tours and one of the more enjoyable test series that I played in. The beach was only ever about 100 metres away. There was always a dance party going on somewhere. So you enjoyed the cricket and you enjoyed life off the field. The circuit was very busy.
I'm sure it was. You speak there, Greg, about some of the great atmospheres. Obviously, quite. We're obviously seeing some of that as well, at sort of Park 25 and Karen Rolton Oval during the Shield as well. Similar sort of atmospheres going at the moment. But I'd imagine you, more so than anyone, maybe in Australian cricket, would have a great sense of the structures in place in Indian cricket with your time, obviously, coaching the national team there. I mean, you said once that if India ever got their act together, that no team would ever beat them again. I want to know, how strong is the Ranji Trophy in relation to the Sheffield Shield? And I note that, like, for instance, their domestic T20 competition is obviously the IPL, which they play at the end of the season, whereas in Australia, we're smacking it right back in the middle of the season. So the Shield players are playing sort of two seasons strung together, which I know the players don't really love, but it is what it is, I suppose. So, Ranji Trophy, I think it's 36 teams over 4 tiers, I think I'm right in saying. I mean, how strong is the Ranji Trophy in comparison to the Sheffield Shield?
It's probably somewhere between, wherever the best first-grade competition is in Australia and first-class cricket in Australia. It's competitive because when you've got 1 billion people playing cricket and only 11 can play for India, it's dog-eat-dog. I can't believe, the journey that the 11 blokes go on that finish up playing for India is unbelievable. And how any one of them gets there is incredible. Now, it's more so these days than ever before because basically the Indian team was picked out of Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, Delhi. That was pretty much it for much of the first, 50 years of Indian cricket. In fact, up until, so probably 60 years, early 2000s, that was pretty much it. And I think, it was during my time there, we started picking kids out of some of the lesser metros, as they call them in India. And I mean, some of those lesser metros have got 5 million people in them. But, Ranchi, where Dhoni came from, I mean, no one had ever been heard of from Ranchi before. Some of the places that, guys like Raina came from and others, they had never had test cricketers before. So you can imagine, they were playing cricket but never getting any recognition. And so if you didn't play in the right city, you didn't play at the right club, you didn't have the right coach, it was very hard to play for India. That's very different these days. They're coming from all over the country. The advantage they have over Australia is that they've still got kids playing on the streets, in parks, in, tenement halls and wherever they can find somewhere to play cricket. Dhoni has never heard of a cricket coach pretty much before he got to the Indian cricket team. He grew up playing cricket with his mates at school. In fact, he wasn't really a cricketer. He was a soccer player who just played cricket because his mates were playing cricket and he happened to be good at it. When I first saw Dhoni, he'd already played one international one-day game for India before I saw him. But the first time I saw him bat in a practice match that we had early in my time there, I'd never seen a bloke hit balls into parts of the ground that he hit them, because he had developed a game all of his own. And I think that's the advantage that India has over the structures of most of certainly the established cricket countries. I think we overcoach. India undercoaches, but I would always prefer undercoaching to overcoaching. And India still has that advantage. Forget about being the best team in the world. If India got their act together, they could have the best 5 teams in the world. There is so much good cricket. After I finished with the Indian team, I worked for 18 months for Rajasthan cricket. Ian Fraser and I set up their academy and ran their academy for 18 months. They've got, I think, 20-odd regions in Rajasthan, and we got them to send the best 20 young cricketers from each region, one region at a time, down to Jaipur, where the head of Rajasthan cricket was and the main training centre. And we would sift through those guys and pick the best sort of half a dozen out of each region. By the end of it, we hadn't got through the whole 20 regions by the end of it. But we gave them 50 young cricketers that I would say half of them would have been good enough to go on and play Sheffield Shield cricket.
Wow. 99%
of them have never played for Rajasthan. So that'll give you an idea of the depth of quality of cricket. So Ranji cricket is very competitive.
Right.
They've got an under, from 16 years of age, basically, there's a junior Ranji competition where these kids are playing full-time cricket. So when we get to the under-19 level, with an Australian under-19 team at an under-19 World Cup, our kids have probably played 100 games of cricket. These Indian kids have played 5,000 games of cricket. So their cricket craft is so far in advance of ours. Yeah. We make up the gap from there on. I think our structures are better from that point onward. But I remember talking to one of the Indian kids at the 2012 World Cup. He went on and played. I think he played 3 under-19 World Cups, and he was never older than 17.
Jesus.
But I said to him, "What about school?" He said, "I don't go to school." He said, "I get one crack at cricket. If I miss out, that's it. I can go back to school anytime." So it's a totally different environment.
Yeah.
I feel like putting a bat in my 2.5-year-old son's hands right now. He's already behind.
He is behind. Well, apart from the obvious handicaps that he's got, but he's certainly behind in relation to the kids that grow up in the subcontinent. He could have picked a more talented father, but anyway, that's his problem.
Oh, we only met today. You're obviously. I just love experiencing, that little insight. Yeah,
I feel like I play Test cricket.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're obviously a deep thinker about the way we bring cricketers through, Greg. And I know you said earlier you're looking forward to getting to this question. Just on the youth focus, I mean, I'm sure you've heard it all before on criticism of the Futures League and the way it disincentivised older players. Some even wondered if there'd be an age limit on the baggy green cap. Look. Rather than mind that further, because I think it's been mined pretty hard. I want to ask, was there anything from your playing career that informed that focus on youth? I mean, we all know what it's like to encounter the 35-year-old who bowls stump to stump with a ring field, hogging 25 overs a game, muscling balls over the top on slow wickets, for 20 overs. I know you played a bunch of county cricket where there was plenty of old blokes at hang out. I guess I want to know, which older player just triggered your zealous belief in youth, or was it the experience when you're wearing shorts with Mr. Wellington? Which was the player that that created the straw that broke the camel's back?
No one player, all of it informed my belief, and it's not a focus on youth; it's a focus on talent. You've got to recognise talent, and the sooner you recognise talent, the better the chance is that talent will be realised. I mean, at 14 years of age, I needed Kingsley Wellington in my ear, and I needed Parry and Smith whistling the ball around my head. I didn't need, I'd already shown at the various underage levels that I could cope with each level, and at the right time, I got elevated to the next level. The worst thing you can do to talent is to hold it at a level at which it's already competent for too long. And there's a very good example in our own family. Ian and I went through Prince Alfred College when the first 11 played in the men's B grade competition. By the time I finished school, the school had gone back to the students' grade, GPS competition. So Trevor played all of his school cricket at Prince Alfred College in, playing against his age group. And he dominated, more so than Ian and I had dominated school because we were playing against men. So it was a tougher competition. I have no doubt that had Trevor had the benefit that we had, that, things may have been better for him and, he would have developed even better as a player. Graham Hick is another example who went from Zimbabwe to England to pursue cricket as a profession and a career and absolutely blitzed county cricket. He was ready to play Test cricket by the time he was 20, 21 years of age, but he didn't qualify by residence. You had to do 7 years at that stage until he was 26. He had adapted to county cricket. He'd found a way to avoid, and this is not in an unkind way, but, he was smart enough that the one genuinely good or quick bowler in the opposition, he could find a way to handle that and get down the other end and make mincemeat of the rest of the bowlers. 26, by the time he got to play Test cricket, at the Test level, it's very hard to hide at the other end. And he had missed the challenges that he needed to take his batting to the next level. I have no doubt that had he played Test cricket at 21, his Test record would have been very different. Much better than it was. And it's not a bad record, but he could have been just as good at the highest level that he was at county level. You mentioned that I played 2 years of county cricket. I looked around that dressing room at blokes who weren't trying to get better. They'd been in the system for 10 years. They liked the life of a professional cricketer, albeit it wasn't hugely well paid at the time. But it was better than the alternative because most of them would have been storemen in a warehouse somewhere. Their biggest ambition was to be a groundsman at a school or a cricket coach at a school. They weren't particularly ambitious people, and they weren't trying to get better as cricketers. They were trying to hang on. They just wanted one more contract. And there I am as a 19-year-old sitting in the dressing room wondering why these blokes didn't care whether we won or lost. They weren't interested. They were just hanging in there to get one more contract. So I didn't realise it at the time, but that was a lesson. And when professional cricket came into Australia, I argued with whoever wanted to discuss it that whatever we do, don't import county cricket. We have to have a system that still encourages performance and encourages people to keep trying to get better. Sadly, we didn't follow that system. We followed pretty much, guaranteed contracts. You get paid whether you perform or not. Obviously, if you're not performing, eventually you'll drop off the contract. But that's the challenge. And what the biggest difference between developing cricketers in Australia today than when I grew up was the story I told you about my first grade game for Glenelg against Eric Freeman and Neil Hawke, who weren't the best opening attack that Australia ever had. But I tell you what, try telling a 17-year-old that they weren't any good. They were quick, they bowled well, and they had the presence of having worn that baggy green cap. So I already admired them. That's not happening today. And I'll bore you a bit longer if you'll allow me, but 2008, I reckon, we did a review of Australian cricket. There were 5 players under 25 on state contracts. Now, if that didn't scare people, it should have, because that was our future. And the only advantage that England had over Australia with their county system was that they had at least 18 teams. So if they only had 2 or 3 players in each team, they still had 36 players to choose from. We had 6 teams, and if we only had 2 or 3 players that were future potential Test cricketers, we had a problem. And the decision to change the format was taken by about 30 people, including the board of Cricket Australia. I'm not quite sure why I keep getting the blame for it, but I'm happy to wear it because I believe very strongly to this day, and for as long as I breathe, that we made the right decision to encourage states to contract younger players for the future benefit of Australian cricket, not for a handful of journeyman cricketers.
Great, and it's a staunch defence. I think people will be listening to that very intently. You know what? Just as a follow-up to that, what is the place of the journeyman cricketer then? Because or the experienced cricketer, when is it right for them to be playing and maybe not quite hanging on? And what do you say to those who may suggest that the journeyman or experienced cricketer has much to teach the young player coming through, and without that experienced cricketer, the young player may not develop the way that they need to?
Well, the interesting thing is, I'll answer that question in a roundabout way. You know, club cricket has never produced ready-made first-class cricketers. First-class cricket has never produced ready-made test cricketers. The value of each level is for the individuals to identify themselves as somebody who has a chance to play at the next level, whether that be a fifth grade cricketer, a second grade cricketer, or a first grade cricketer. When I first went down to the Glenelg Cricket Club as a youngster, the first week I went there, they put me in the fifth grade net, and I batted, as a kid, batting against men and some older lads. So they put me in the nets against the fifth grade cricketer. The next week I came back to training, they put me in the fourth grade net, and so on. And I went up. They would have a look at you, and he's coping all right. So we'll try him against the fourth grade bowlers. Yeah, he's doing okay. Yet against the third grade bowlers, and that might be where you stay for a few weeks. But there was a talent identification process going on then, even though it wasn't recognised as such. But the older past players that were around the club helping out, they were just keeping an eye on the young blokes, and this kid looks like he can play a bit, so let's challenge him a bit more. So that was happening naturally in the system. Nobody was ever ready for first grade cricket. Even though I'd played second grade cricket at school, my first grade game was a challenge. It was another step up. And that's what each step is for. And along the way, you'll meet some journeyman cricketers and some older cricketers that are hanging around. And in fact, that used to happen. When my father finished playing first grade cricket, he captained the third grade side for the next 3 or 4 years. He played as a playing captain, but he batted number 8 and he hardly bowled. He was there just to help out and give the kids a bit of guidance along the way. That was really important. You don't need 6 of them in one team. Mm-hmm. And talent is overrated. Experience is overrated. I've seen blokes that have played for 10 years that have only had 1 year's experience 10 times because they keep making the same mistakes that they made last year and the year before that.
There's great cricketers everywhere who can identify with that.
Yeah, look, mate, some blokes love the game and they play the game and they should be encouraged to enjoy it. The biggest mistake that we made in Australian cricket was to turn first grade cricket into an all-day game. When we started playing, it was 1 o'clock till 6 o'clock because blokes went to work on a Saturday morning. Mm. You'd have guys running into the ground at 10 minutes to 1. I can remember our wicketkeeper walking out to bat, walking out onto the field. He had his pads and gloves on, but he hadn't done his laces up yet. He'd come from the pharmacy that morning, and he'd arrived at the ground at 10 to 11, and we were in the field, and he had that long to get ready. And, we played a, 3.5-hour session and then another, 2.5-hour session or whatever it was. Might have been 2.5 and 2-hour sessions with a 20-minute break for afternoon tea. That meant that you had a chance to have a career outside of cricket. And Sundays we didn't play cricket. You had time at home with the families. And all of a sudden we turned grade cricket into an all-weekend affair. And guess what? The wives didn't enjoy that very much. Blokes had young families. We had young families, but we were only gone on Saturday afternoon. And, the club cricketer was only gone on Saturday afternoon. You can point your finger at me as much as you like, but the changes in Australian cricket have happened just by process of time. Professional cricket put a barrier, put a glass ceiling, if you like, between grade cricket and first-class cricket. I coached South Australia, and the first-class cricketers, the question I got asked most is, do I have to play grade cricket on the weekend? They didn't want to go back and play grade cricket. So there have been a whole range of issues. All-day cricket on a Saturday, a lot of Sunday cricket meant that wives started saying, mate, you can't go and play cricket all day every weekend. You got to help me with the kids, and you got to mow the lawn, and you got to do a few other things around the place. We got away from a lot of that because, well, we didn't really, because we still had to mow the lawn on Sundays, which was a pain in the arse. But anyway, first-class cricket became not only, red ball cricket, but white ball cricket. So instead of having 10 weekends off a year where first-class cricketers could go back and play grade cricket for a lot of the season, that stopped happening. So all of a sudden, the sort of experience that you wanted to come back into grade cricket wasn't coming back. And the blokes that were left there were your sort of third 11 cricketers, if you like, because the Test cricketers never played first-class cricket. So we already had, if you want to put a fine point on it, we had a second 11 competition. What we didn't need was another layer of older players running around who weren't going to impact Australian cricket. It was taking 5 years for players to get from under-19 cricket to first-class cricket. So you imagine if we hadn't changed the system and Steve Smith was still running around in first-grade cricket and David Warner was still running around in first-grade cricket, what benefit would that be for Australian cricket? We would have missed a lot of good cricketers if we hadn't forced the states to start contracting young cricketers. So you can fire as many bullets as you like, but Australian cricket has been benefited by the changes. A few individuals haven't been benefited by the changes, and to be fair, they're probably the loudest voices against the changes.
I just needed someone to blame for not ever making that a third grade, Greg. So I appreciate you taking the bullets, though. But
no, that's okay. I have trouble swimming these days. The bloody water runs straight through me. But anyway, I'm getting over it.
What do I ask you, Greg? I mean, there's just one last one from me. You've been so generous with your time this morning. But one of the great questions in cricket that happens every year, basically in Australia, is who is the best since Bradman? And I want to put that question to you because it may well be yourself. Is it Ricky Ponting? Is it Steve Waugh, Alan Border, Steve Smith? Is it Cameron Green? Is it Chris Green? Who is the best since Bradman?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you could have you could drink a lot of beers having that argument or that discussion, because it's not an argument, and it's almost irrelevant. Bradman stuffed it for everyone. But forever and a day. Everyone who's batted since Bradman might as well have gone and played tennis because there's absolutely no point to it.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost irrelevant who's the next best. All of those names you mentioned could well be in the frame for that, but that's not important. The fact of the matter is that we've had champions in every era, and that's great. And that's what Australian cricket has been predicated on. And guess what? Every one of them was picked as a young player. And every one of them, including Bradman, got dropped before they actually graduated and understood what Test cricket. I think Doug Walters is probably the only one I can think of that never got dropped, having been picked as a 19-year-old. And funnily enough, he made 100 in his first 2 Test matches. You ignore youth at your peril because that's where the energy comes from. A cricket team is never a finished article. There's no such thing as this is it. Because if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards. There's no such thing as standing still because all of the opposition are going forward. So you've got to keep re-energising teams all along, and that's why I'm speaking out loudly about Pekoski and Green at the moment. Steve Smith and David Warner, they need that sort of energy coming into the team that will encourage them to maybe go to another level. Plus, they're the right example of the sort of player we want those kids to learn from. They come into the group and see how Smith prepares, Warner prepares, Manus Labuschagne, how he prepares, and all the rest of the guys. I mean, that's the sort of example you want young cricketers to be learning from. Not for somebody who has peaked in first grade or in first-class cricket and, is a worthy player. You're always going to have teams that are going to be made up of those guys that perhaps aren't quite good enough or might have gone to the next level for a moment but have come back. There's always a place for them, but not 11 of them. You always need 5 or 6 players that are trying to go somewhere in any team to keep it moving forward. But getting back to your question, I mean, Smith's record is phenomenal. But you might remember that Michael Hussey had a record. He was averaging 70 at one stage early in his career.
Yeah.
So Michael Hussey's a fair player as well. And Michael was one of those players that came in a bit later, but that was opportunity more than anything else. Michael was identified as a 21, 22-year-old. His chance to be selected early was probably missed when Kadich got picked. It would have been, they would have been pretty close at that stage, but Kadich was the one that was in form at that moment and not Hussey. Hussey could easily have played much earlier, as could Gilchrist. But, I mean, you can argue. I thought Ricky Ponting was a super player. Alan Border, Steve Smith, Hussey at his peak. You can't imagine that Bradman could have done it any better than those blokes. But he was twice as good, for Christ's sake. It's just
doesn't make any
phenomenal.
sense. Yeah.
No, it doesn't make sense. So we're forgetting him.
Sounds like a good play. Just a final one from me, Greg. Just a note on young people and a comment you made in a brilliant feature piece from Adam Burnett, cricket.com.au. Encourage everyone to read that from 2018. It says, Greg wonders if in the maelstrom of full-time cricket and the commitments and pressures and privileges it entails, that perspective has been lost. And you went on to say, regarding young people playing cricket, especially at the top level, they're all brands. Their managers want them on social media to do this and that. Sometimes I hear conversations that worry me. What is it specifically about that worries you?
I think we were lucky that we played in an era when it wasn't professional cricket. We had to have a career outside of cricket, because I think the lessons I learned outside of cricket really informed my cricket a lot, and vice versa. I think cricket informed a lot of other things that I've done in my life. I think it's a very narrow path to send people on, and a very dangerous path. I mean, we didn't have mental illness problems. Well, then again, a few leg spinners I know, but spin bowling's always been fraught, and spinners have always been a little bit different. But the fact was that cricket wasn't our only focus. Our main focus was trying to earn enough money somewhere to be allowed to keep playing cricket for as long as possible. And we shared rooms and we did things like that. So you were never left on your own for long periods. And at night time we went out together. But I see these guys that have got they've got entourages. And at the end of the day's play, they go off with their entourage, and they don't see their teammates between playing hours, after playing hours. And I'm seeing it with young cricketers who've got managers who, the managers are there for a reason, and the reason in a lot of cases might be for their benefit. So it's in the manager's benefit, in interest for them to go and play in some competition because there's some money in it, when they might be better off to have a period of time off, a period of time for reflection of where their cricket's at. Bradman said to me, I spoke to him not long before he died, and I asked him the question, why did you resist so hard better conditions for players? bear in mind, we were never looking for full-time cricket. I'd tried that in county cricket and I didn't like it, and I didn't think it was in my best interest to be playing cricket year-round, full-time. But Bradman said, the exact quote was, Greg, sport loses something when it becomes a business. And I think, we knew the reason we were playing cricket was for the love of it. And we kept playing the game as long as we could and as long as we loved the game. I think there are some blokes, I've met some guys that are playing cricket because they can. I'm not convinced that they love it to the degree that we loved it. And that's dangerous. And the pressures on young cricketers today are much greater than they were on us. It's much harder for a young batsman to become a great batsman today than it was for us. The demands of three formats, all of the pressures of full-time cricket doesn't suit everybody. And we can all think of one or two players who had all of the physical talent that they needed to play well at the highest level, but they couldn't cop the lifestyle. And it's tough. And I think the dangers for young sportsmen in the modern era are far greater than ever before. And we're seeing that with the high incidence of mental illness that's creeping into sport worldwide. And that's a worry. And the administrative bodies of these sports have a huge responsibility to these young athletes to make sure that we look after them in every sense of the word. And I think it's difficult to do. It's a huge challenge. It's probably the greatest challenge in sport today.
Greg, I think I can speak on behalf of all listeners who've tuned in for this epic interview. In fact, I don't think we've done one as long or as epic as this, who'll have been vacuuming or mowing their lawns with headphones on, or purchasing their avocados at the market, for whom they've been given much to think about from this conversation. It's been riveting from our perspective. We really appreciate it. And I just off the top of my head, there's a couple of former prime ministers coming out now saying things that perhaps they didn't say as strongly, as they perhaps could have when they were younger. And there's something about that in the way you're speaking here as well. And I say that out of respect. It's really lovely to hear such fierce views on cricket from someone who obviously knows so much. And we're really appreciative that you have given us so much time to put that forward. And I know a lot of people who will be listening will be appreciating it as well. So on behalf of them and us, thank you so much for this chat.
No, my pleasure. As you can tell, I do enjoy talking about cricket.
This has been a baseball chat.
Well, we can go down that path if you like. We've probably got another 15 or 20 minutes. What do you need to know?
Did Murali chuck it? No, we'll leave that there. Thanks so much, Greg. And look, just finally off the top of my head as well, you do such great work with the Greg Chappell Foundation and the Sleep Out you guys do. And I'll just say this on air, but any help that we can provide for that, please sing out.
That's a silly thing to say. I'll be on the phone very soon.